John Doyle from Optix EQ, and today's race of the day is really a tutorial on handicapping in inclement weather, bad days of racing with weather and off the turf and all the rest that we have to deal with, especially in the wintertime back east. And so I think it'd be a good opportunity to look at what things you can do within Optix to help you navigate through those difficult times. It's actually a request from one of our clients. I thought it was a good one. So first thing I wanted to look at was just the video we did yesterday on Monday, the 3rd. It was Fairgrounds. It was race 8, and it was an off the turf race. And you can see the left hand image is a little blurry, but that's the plot that I kind of captured off of video. So that was the before, I would say. So that was before they took it off the turf. So that's how the horses plotted. And remember, we said that, the 11-3, the 6 kind of stood out. We had high contention and an average speed rating. So, we thought the 6 looked pretty good in the 3. And we were a little negative on the 11's form, even though he plotted very well. If you shift to the right, you can see two things happened. First of all, we had some scratches, notably the 3. And then we had to switch to the off the turf. So you can see how the plot really changed dramatically. The other thing you can see is the surface and distance now is not the turf, it's the dirt. So you can see a lot of horses fall out, and you can see some horses kind of really jump up. The most significant change, I think, because the 11 still looks good, the 6 doesn't look as good just for the reason that he's going to be coming from off the pace, and the contention goes from a flame to a snowflake. Okay, so that's negative on him. And the 8 kind of really, look at his standard plot, really kind of jumps up, as another horse that's looks viable in there. So an upgrade on the 8, a little bit of a downgrade on the 6. Not a toss, but a downgrade on the 6. 11's the same. We still got the issues with the form. So the 8 went off 9-1 and won the race. The 11 finished second. The 1 also that we kind of mentioned for underneath was third. Well, the 6 got off bad, made a good run late, but finished fourth. But that's why it's very important to evaluate these plots post scratches and also post surface change. Dramatic changes in this plot that determine the outcome differently. So a real big upgrade on the 8, and came through at 9-1. So that's the first thing when you're evaluating these races, especially off the turf or even wet weather. Now, people always ask, why don't we put sloppy races for the surface and distance? And we looked at it. The reason we don't is that all wet or sloppy tracks are the same, right? You have harrowed, you have sealed. So some of those tracks are muddy and they could be tiring. Others could be really fast, almost like concrete, and the horses run really fast. So they're not the same. And that's why it makes it so difficult handicapping wet weather races, because you're really almost like it's the surface for the first time the horse has actually been on. Even though you could say, well, this horse has always run good on a sloppy. That's not really always the case, because those sloppy tracks are sometimes different, especially when they're at different venues. Okay. So that's why we just put the dirt races in. So we replaced the turf with the dirt races in that plot to the right. So that's the first important. Reevaluate your plots, major changes. And that's why I always encourage people to use the interactive version versus PDFs and stuff like that, because you want to get the latest information and you want to get the changes, because it's important. The second thing about these off days with weather is what you want to be doing is watching races early in the day for that track you're playing. If you're going to play the races later, if you're in a contest and races 6, 7, or 8 or in that, you want to be watching the races early to get a feel for it. Because on the 1st of January at Aqueduct, you cannot pass a horse, pretty much. Really a strong front runner's bias. And so sometimes with bias is difficult if you don't have experience, because it's sometimes better to kind of just step back, wait a couple of days, reevaluate, look at things. But I think for even people with not an advanced degree in bias handicapping could figure it out. You couldn't pass a horse at Aqueduct, and they created some opportunities later in the day. I'm looking at here the 3rd race. And because, again, the speed horses were doing well, what do? Well, you want to focus in on quadrant one, circle or square. You want to get a horse that's in form and is in quadrant one. And you could see like this race had high contention, high speed rating, and yet the top three runners are just in and around quadrant one. Um, so that was one race. Another race you can see here. Let me just go to, yeah, here was this two horses, 4-1 over 21-1, kind of lone horses in quadrant one on surface and distance. Um, so you kind of get the idea here. And then again, circles winning races in quadrant one, even though it looks contentious. The eight in this case was 15-1. So you could see there really was a bias because you're getting horses outrunning their odds, because of the bias. But when you start seeing, like I said, when you start seeing early in the day, there created some opportunities later in the day to kind of go after some of these horses that were good value and also had an advantage. So that's another thing to look for. So deep tiring tracks, you might be focused on squares, okay? And again, these plots are changing because of weather and scratches. But when it's a speed bias, you want to be focusing on quadrant one regardless. You want to look for informed horses in quadrant one, and you hope they take to the surface, right? I mean, that's always an issue. So that's the second thing when you're doing these days. Watch the races early, see if you can find a bias and take certain actions. And with the plot, you can take certain actions pretty easily by looking at it and making adjustments. The other thing I want to kind of talk about is some of the labels that we have in notes, and one in particular is called weather. Okay, so you could see it here in this horse, right? So this is going to be this is a horse that's running on the 6th at Aqueduct in the 4th race. And when you see weather, what that means is that label means there was extreme weather. So we can kind of almost give an excuse for horses that run in that weather, and you can almost, horses that really run well, like a big effort, like a top, you could downgrade a little bit because it's just, again, unpredictable. So it's just sometimes an event that we find that when it's extreme weather, either horses don't take to it or they take to it really well. So in this case, Beautiful Karen didn't take to it. You could see her form before that, 91, 83. She was, the 91 was a little bit topish for her, but she kind of runs in the 80s, and she really tailed off there, right? And the other thing about her in this race, if I just bring up her, let's see if I got her plot here. Oh, nope, this is her plot. I'm going to bring up the plot for that race to just show you where she was expected to be. Yeah. So if you look at Beautiful Karen, okay, look at her. Look where she plots. She was the 5. She's in quadrant 1 square. So that effort, probably had something to do with the weather because she comes back, and even though, look at this, she runs at another sloppy racetrack and she runs 6th. Okay, so she runs kind of poorly again, but she runs 16 points better. And the reason why I'm not so negative on this race is because if you look at the plot, she wasn't expected to run via the plot, and I'm going to pull up her plotting for this race, and she was, a pretty medium-sized circle in a very contentious field. Okay, so you could see that 16 points up was a tremendous improvement. So you could tell that the weather really did have an impact on her performance because she was like 80s, and then she bangs it back up to a 76. It's just that she caught a field and also a pace dynamic that was not to her liking. You can see she was up close and then kind of faded. So, she's now getting a drop in class. If she can get back to her 80s, I guess she can be competitive in the race. But that wasn't really the reason I was showing. I was just showing you the weather label and how sometimes but you got to evaluate the weather label in context of the other races around this horse and what they were expected to do. So I think that's a pretty important notes label that's, could be a good use when you're handicapping these wet weather races or these races that are taken off the turf or what have you. It's good to note, okay? So, I mean, because again, this is what the point I tried to make earlier. If you just say, beautiful Karen, not on fast races. Um, she's run 80s. She's won before in the mud, right? These are all good. I mean, they're all different kind of wet track races, so that's why it's difficult. But when you see the weather and you can see the really downturn numbers and then the turn back up in numbers, you could tell that the weather, that was a significant weather event. And sometimes you can really upgrade horses the next time when you see that. Okay, so that's it for wet weather races and handicapping. If you have any more questions about this particular thing, send me a note on YouTube. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also contact us at optixeq.com. Thanks for listening.